Starting, we cut right to the action as Ben, Gwen, and Kevin are all fighting a hybrid that was trying to set off a teleporter. But it had gotten damaged in the fight and he and Ben had both been sucked inside. However, where exactly they'd ended up wasn't exactly clear because of the damage to the device. Ben and the hybrid continued to fight, with them yelling out about how this was the second time he'd messed up their plans, though Ben says he's messed up the hybrid's plans more than once. The hybrid says no, specifically him, twice, confusing Ben. They then stated that Ben hurled him into space as the Toku star. Having a sudden realization, Ben says, "Wait, that was you?" Looking surprised by that new information. The hybrid then says that yes, they were, while still continuing to fight, as a giant worm came out of the ground to attack. Ben questioning if that was a Dravik, and asking if they were on Turawusta, sounding frustrated. Ben says that if they're gonna survive, they have to work together until they get off this rock, after they beat the worm, and drove it away. He also says once they are, they can go back to trying to kill each other or whatever they were doing prior. The hybrid says that Ben disgusts him, to which Ben responds that he's no bouquet of roses himself, and they needed to just get going, though they tell him that he shall walk 20 paces behind him. Ben smacks him with his plumber's staff, telling him now's not the time to be a specious. They look at Ben, seemingly confused by that statement, as he then sighed and began to explain it to him. We cut to sometime later as they had been wandering the desert, with the hybrid having told Ben his name was Ryan Rasek III, but his name was long and Ben had just started calling him Riney instead. The two were having conversation about everything, with Riney stating that they, the hybrid, were the oldest living species in the universe, with Ben telling them that that doesn't matter. Imagine if someone showed up on his planet and started spouting the same things, and how he'd feel being told this himself, that he was worthless because he was impure and a mongrel, and that his species was below this new person. This had sorta gotten through to them, at least a little, as they were slowly starting to understand. When Riney collapses from the heat, starting to dehydrate, Ben changes into Big Chill and begins to breathe out cold air that helps them cool down and stop wasting away. Unlike in the show, Riney doesn't tell Ben to stop, but instead questions why he would help them after everything they have done. Answering that, Ben says if he could help at least one hybrid see that everyone can exist together, then it's completely worth it. And that he's helping because he wants to, not because he expects something from it. He may be a bounty hunter, but he still remembers his grandfather's words clearly. You don't help because you expect to get something out of it. You help because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes he may forget that, but they always come back when the time is right. Riney says that Ben's grandfather sounds like a wise man, to which Ben agrees with him about that, and now that Riney was cooled, they continued on. We later see them being surrounded by Despotidae, which Ben recognizes and called out to Riney to get up to the rock formation. Rather than arguing over who gave the orders, he does so as Ben changed into swamp fire and blasted the ground with large amounts of flame, while he slowly made his way towards the rocks and blasted some of the formation, making it crumble on top of the creature, sending them retreating. Though Riney starts to slide down because of the sand moving, Ben grabbed them, stopping them from doing so. Riney, instead of getting offended like in the actual show, actually says thank you to Ben for helping them, something they'd never thought they'd say to someone other than another hybrid. They'd had to stop and ponder that, though. Swampfire smirks in response and said that they should set up camp for the night because it was starting to get dark there. After having a campfire started, Ben tells Riney to sit, explaining Earthling traditions to him, and despite being confused by why he'd done so, the two had actually talked about various stuff, how they'd grown up, the differences in traditions, about their friends and family, with Riney asking if this Gwen Daniels he'd talked about was Ben's mate. Ben says sort of, but it's a little more complicated than that, and begins to explain the whole concept of dating to Riney, to which the hybrid says, so it's like finding your own mate through trial and error until you find the one that you could see being mated with the rest of your life, instead of having their families arrange possible breeding prospects to you. To which he says, rough way to put it, but yeah, basically that. Most of the time, family doesn't get a say-so anymore, though some cultures on Earth still do that. He asked if Ben's family approves of Ben seeing Gwen as a prospective mate, and he does admit that they do, as Ben's dad and Gwen's dad were actually really good friends growing up together. Though soon Riney fires off nails towards Ben, shooting the large scorpion-like creature that it appeared. He'd grabbed it after it was down, but the creature bit his wrist with their pincers, and as he tried to shake them off, he'd accidentally had his hand cut off in the process. Ben tells Riney not to move and changes into Swampfire again. Using his vines, he helped to reattach Riney's arm as the Omnitrix helped to repair the damage so that his hand was able to be reattached, thankfully. Riney once again had thanked Ben for his kindness, even though they were meant to be enemies, though Ben points out that they're surviving together, and surviving in the wilderness with someone usually helps them become friends. Usually, but not always. And Riney stops to consider Ben's words about the whole thing. He seemed to be thinking a lot lately, questioning things he'd never thought to question before. Once they'd finally made it to the relay station, Riney tells Ben to go home to his friends and family, though Ben tells Riney that he should come back with him. Maybe they could get the other hybrid to understand there's a better way, though Riney says that this is very unlikely. He may very well return to Earth someday, but for now he needs to remain in self-imposed exile until he could sort out everything. Ben sighs but nods in agreement and holds out his hand, telling him it's an Earthling tradition. Riney, not understanding, holds out his hand as well, and Ben shakes his hand, reaching out with his other one, and shook hands with Riney as a way to say goodbye for now. Riney tells Ben that before he leaves, however, of something that they'd planned to do, and nodding, Ben headed through the teleporter. When he comes out of the teleporter, Gwen looks happy to see him and runs over hugging him, with him hugging her back, as she'd said she was glad that he was okay. Kevin asked about the hybrid, to which Ben says that the hybrid wouldn't be coming through that thing, though sounded a bit saddened by that, confusing them.